everyone, welcome back to my channel. I have the lovely Kaelyn with me today, and today we are going to answer some questions. Masters versus PhD. We're both in Oxford, so this is going to kind of, I suppose, be like a little bit of a mirroring experience. Do you want to say hi to the people, Kaelyn?
Hi friends, if you don't know, I create YouTube videos over on my channel at Kaelyn Grace Apple, and I did my master's at Oxford. I did the MST 9-month master's in US history and graduated in 2020, and then immediately began my PhD at Yale in history and African American studies. I study matrilineal descent and the law of slavery in the 17th century, and I'm now in year 4. I'm ABD, which in US PhD programs means that I have advanced candidacy. I'm now working on my dissertation, and I'm living in London and coming to Oxford to do research and work on my dissertation every once in a while and hang out with Kate. And yeah, we're excited to hang out and chat and answer some questions.
Absolutely. And if you guys don't know, I'm currently doing my master's in literature and art through Oxford University, and we are going to be discussing the differences between master's and PhD. I popped an open question box. I don't even know what they're called. Open question box on Instagram, and we've gotten some great responses. So, wow, we've actually got quite a few. How different is the writing style in master's versus PhD, US versus UK, and how do you pivot between the approaches? I think this is such a good question to kind of kick everything off. Granted that I think a lot of these we could do like
Entire videos. Yeah. Okay. So I'll start with talking about the differences between the UK and the US. One thing that I would say I noticed more so in the way that academics wanted me to write in the UK is that they wanted you to be more directly argumentative.
Yeah.
I was really focused on training in historiography, so I was really focused on literature, in that I was so used to writing papers that really centered around the arguments of other people and then using that to kind of springboard your own argument.
Yeah.
And that's essentially the process. However, the thing that I was told when I was at Oxford is that they really wanted me to argue against the scholarship. So rather than the advice that I get from my advisors in the US, and this is from my undergraduate training, writing an honors thesis, and then now working on a dissertation in the US at for the PhD, is that I am contributing to the discourse, and perhaps I am presenting an opportunity to move away from the discourse, but I'm not like actively arguing against the discourse and saying this is wrong, I disagree with so and so on these grounds, they did this wrong. Like, that is one, not in my nature, but it's very different style of writing. It's
definitely something I've picked up being in Oxford for the masters as well. They're always saying to you, it's great to be able to like critique the discourse or critique the work, and they want your own opinions coming through. Yeah. But it's this kind of active engagement with the discourse. And if you can like poke holes in it, they love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. Not that I've never studied in the USA, so I don't know like how different it is compared to that. But I always found like you get praised for dissenting.
Yeah, no, and I found that in the classroom also. And so that class in particular had 3 male professors, and then us 9 students on the other side of the table. Very weird power dynamic, to be honest.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I just remember one of the professors just like nodding. I was like, respect. Oh, so that's how I'm supposed to operate here. Okay,
Respect.
Whereas every time I've kind of disagreed with a professor at a U.S. institution, in my experience, this might not be everybody's experience, but my experience is like, oh God, did I just do something wrong? Whereas here it was kind of encouraged.
That's so interesting. I love that. Okay, well, that's really kicked us off to a really good start. I'm loving this. This is a great question as well. How much work do you have to do outside of your dissertation subjects? This is specifically for the question, specifically for masters, but I think it is interesting from a PhD perspective as well, because I'm assuming you don't do much work outside of your dissertation in your PhD.
Depends on your program.
Yeah.
Depends on your program. The difference between, I feel like there's like an entire video.
I know this, so we have to like really summarize
about the difference between US PhD programs and UK or EU PhD programs. So in the UK or in the EU, your PhD is much shorter and it's just focused on the dissertation. Yeah. So you get in and you pretty much like immediately jump into literature review, or most people that I know start with literature review.
Yeah.
And that you are kind of required to submit like a transfer report. Everybody calls it something slightly different. But it's basically the proposal for the dissertation to show that you've done enough reading and you have done enough research thus far in the first year to demonstrate that you know what it is you're going to be writing on and you have a plan.
Yeah.
Which in the US is known as the prospectus.
Yeah. Yeah.
But in the US, every institution has like different coursework requirements and also has different comprehensive exam requirements.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
it's a different
and so you do actually have to take classes outside of your subject matter. I think I have a more I think my experience is even more unique because I'm in a joint program between history and African American studies because I have to fulfill the requirements of both departments. Yeah. And so my experience in coursework, like I had to take a class on urban ethnography.
That's so interesting.
And I had to take a class on like documentary film, which has zero to do with my dissertation.
That's so cool though.
But what about your program? Because it's the MLA rather than the straight literature program.
Well, so I think we do a lot of work actually outside of our dissertation, particularly for like the first half of the program is all about exposing you to different areas and different subjects in the hope of kind of sparking ideas for your dissertation. But it's because it's an interdisciplinary course, but I don't even think this really matters like across master's programs. I think they do try and do this, no matter if it's interdisciplinary or just subject specific. They do try and expose you to like a lot of coursework in the first part of your master's to try and like develop those ideas that you might get for your dissertation and to like expand on those ideas that you may have for dissertation. So for us in the MLA program, not only are we looking at like a variety of subjects, but we're also looking at a variety of timelines. Yeah. So we've got we've got subjects that range from like early modern time period all the way up to like the long 19th century, for example. Okay. So it is very, very broad, and you do get to like actually experience a lot of coursework, which I thoroughly enjoy. Yeah. Because I do think it informs what I'll eventually write in my dissertation. Still got to get there, which is great. What's the difference between a master's and a PhD program?
Oh God, that's such a complicated question. So it's complicated in that there are so many different types of master's programs. And even here at Oxford, you've got the MSc, you've got the MLA, you've got the MST, you've got the MPhil. And so they're very different in terms of how it is that they're structured and the way that they're weighted and how much time you get for the dissertation, etc. But the way that I would characterize it is that a master's is, this is how I've described it to clients before that I've worked with in admissions. Undergrad is to give you the very basis of knowledge. Yes. To give you the survey. Yes. And to get you to begin thinking in terms of questioning the sources and questioning how things are being done. A master's degree is for understanding the scholarship, is for comprehending the kind of foundational roots of how the actual research is done. So it's not just about, in history, it's not just about the themes and the timeline and the people, and the master's program is really about, I would say, methods and for trying to familiarize you with the practices of the discipline and to get you to begin using those tools in an initial project.
Yeah.
A PhD, on the other hand, is for training you to be contributing to your field.
Correct.
And it is a professionalizing experience whereby you are expected to mature from somebody who is being taught the discipline to being somebody who is in the discipline.
Correct.
And who is also going to become an educator of the discipline.
Yeah. My supervisor said something exactly the same. Like, basically, like, you become the expert in your very specific field in the PhD because you spend so much time engaging with it. So it is that next step of kind of like really honing in on your subject matter or your topic. And I don't think people really get how narrow it can be on the PhD scale, because like even at master's level I still feel like it's quite broad. Like the idea of your dissertation is still like you're narrowing it in, but not nearly enough that you would do it on like the PhD scale.
As you get further along in the discipline, or as you get further along in your academic training, the questions that you begin asking are more narrow.
Yeah.
And when you go into a master's program, I think that your questions just get less broad.
Yeah.
And now that I'm working on the dissertation, and you have to think about how it is to actually structure it.
Yeah.
And actually write the damn thing. You realize how much you have to narrow it down, because in order for you to actually present evidence in a way that is independently sourced, you just don't have enough space.
Yeah.
And also because you're trying to think of the structure in a narrative sense.
Yeah.
You also realize you can't do everything.
Even writing, I think this is the thing, like even writing on a particular text, like a book, you would need to even narrow that down more for a PhD. It's not like you could write a thesis on Wuthering Heights. You would have to like write on something very, very specific in Wuthering Heights.
Well, I had a client come to me once wanting to apply for a PhD program, and I said, okay, well, what research do you want to do? And they said, I want to study the 19th century and I wanted to study gender. And I was like, okay, let's like narrow that down.
Yeah.
And I basically we spent the next 40 minutes like narrowing down further and further and further and further and further. And I'm like, you could write an entire dissertation on lace making in
the
1980s or the 1890s in Edinburgh only.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's nothing to say of like what else is out there.
Yeah.
But that's exactly like, I think the PhD is so narrow. So your master's is kind of like your insight into it. I'm dipping my toe into the water. Yeah. Kind of analogy.
I think it also asks you to think about how it is that you're sourcing material.
Yeah.
And how it is that you're thinking about evidence and how it is that you're using it. Because in the undergrad thesis, you're intended to do independent research, but it's usually looking at sources that other people have touched.
Yeah, like your secondary sources and things like that, rather than your primary sources, your primary evidence. Yeah.
Whereas a master's, like, you kind of need to begin sourcing the material. Yeah. The PhD is, you better find something new and interesting. Or, at the very minimum, you better have a very fresh take on something that's been done before.
Yeah. Greetings from Algeria. Hi, guys. Lovely to have an international audience here. This is kind of what we were just talking about. Finding a good research topic and communicating that with supervisors or teachers in order for them to accept being a supervisor for a topic.
Well, what advice did I give you?
So, just FYI, I was a client of Kaelyn's when I was applying for the master's, and without her help, I don't think I would be here. So, thank you for that. But finding a good research topic, I remember you and I talked about this quite significantly, about trying to find that sort of area of, I always remember it as like the niggling question. Yeah. Yeah. The question that's kind of like an earworm that you just can't seem to get out of your head. And I remember I came to you, I had this broad subject where I was like, I'm really interested in like early modern representation of minorities. And it was exactly that. So you said to me, okay, what kind of minorities?
Yeah.
What, what specific texts? How to like really start to narrow in on those questions, which was ideal. And eventually we came up with a master's proposal, which was representations in Edmund Spenser's The Fairy Queen. That was great, but being able to then share that with like potential supervisors, because I sent that off to like some of the professors that I was looking to work with. And having that ahead of time.
So important.
So important, because they have an idea of where your thoughts are going, where your research is going, and they'll obviously know if this is actually a gap that needs to be filled or not. And so it was really helpful at the start to try and like get that together. Did I summarize our interaction?
You did. The only thing I think was missing is that when you're thinking about developing a research question, it doesn't come out of thin air. No. You have to do so much reading. And the one thing that a professor had told me, and this is what I told you to do, is have a notepad, like a place on Notion. Anytime a question pops into your head, or whenever something looks odd, write it down. You will not, I promise you will not remember it. So you need to write it down.
This was so helpful, by the way, going through like my undergrad, like just having a notepad where I had like, this would be an interesting essay. This would be an interesting essay. This would be an interesting essay. And before you know it, you start to pick up on themes.
And there's pretty much not a single professor that I've ever met that in lecture does not mention not enough has been done on this.
Yes. Yeah.
Write it down.
Yes, write it down. Those are your gaps. Those you want.
They are. And anytime something looks a little funny to you, or like you think the analysis just seems a little off, that's what you want to write down.
Yeah.
And the questions that I had were just because I was sitting in class and I was like, that seems a little bit of an odd correlation. Yeah. And then I would go talk to my professors about it and I would say, well, where does this come from? And why was it enacted? And who enacted it? And they're like, I don't know. I don't honestly think anybody knows. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, and then they point you in the direction of some literature and then you go dig there and then you realize that people know a little bit more than your professor might know, but they don't actually know.
They don't always know. There's a lot of questions that, I mean, a lot of people think that maybe academia is saturated, and maybe to some extent it is. But there are still a lot of questions out there that haven't been answered. There is mountains and mountains and mountains of knowledge that has not yet been explored.
Yeah.
And this is what our master's supervisors were talking about in this last residency. You know, in Tudor England, for instance, we were talking about the history of Tudor England. Yes, we know a fair amount about like Tudor monarchy and the Tudor elite and all that kind of stuff. But even though there are questions in there that we still need answered.
There's still not enough about like diet and hygiene of the time.
This is exactly
and the environment. Like there's so many different ways to
look at these things. Yeah.
An intervention.
Absolutely.
And to find a gap. You just need to, when you're reading or when you're in class,
make note of these.
Be aware of those gaps, because so many people go in with a passion for the general subject matter or the general work. And they think that means that they should go and do research in it. But I always say that you should start with a question.
Yeah.
And it has to be a question that like is driving you nuts.
Yeah. And that's exactly what like our master's supervisors are telling us as well. What are the questions that you are asking that you want answered? And even if you don't answer them, but you still like contribute a little bit to that question. Yeah. That's good. That is, you don't have to have the answers. Yeah. But you can at least say like, oh, well, this uncovers this a bit more, but maybe there's more research in this. There you go. There's your PhD. There is a lot of questions here that I think are ones that I will just respond to in the chat or in the comments below. But I think we'll finish off with this question, which is prevalent, I think, for both of us because we're both international students.
Yeah.
What are the biggest challenges for an international student at Oxford?
So I'm going to make this very Oxford specific for those that are interested in Oxford. I'm happy to also answer the question in regard to like generally studying abroad. But the thing about Oxford coming from the States, I came from UCLA, which in my opinion is a quite progressive space, politically, methodologically, etc. And one thing on the plus side of Oxford that I think is really unique and is great in terms of the way that the master's programs are structured is it is a perfect crash course to see if this is something you actually want to do, because it's quick, but it also requires a lot of self-determination to make it happen. And when you have an advisor who's really supportive, which I did, the sky's the limit. You can do so much, and there's just so much access to information here. And it's based on the library contracts that Oxford has. It's based on the scholarships and the travel grants and the things that they have available. Your college library, for example, can get any book you could possibly want. So there's so much access. And I think another thing that was really unique to me coming from the US and then having gone back to the US is the college system at Oxford. I think is the best thing about Oxford. The community that you have here is so unique because in your college, in your residential college, you're mixed in with so many different people of different disciplines. And so in terms of diversity of thought and diversity of background, it is an incredibly international space. It's an incredibly intellectually diverse space. I had a friend group that had an archaeologist and a political scientist and a computer scientist and a biologist. Like, we had a group of people that just really loved their work. And even though our work wasn't the same, it was just such great camaraderie. And I think that that's one of the things that you do not get in the States. It's very subjugated.
And isolated.
It's kind of it's oddly segregated by discipline, and I think that that's a bad thing. I don't think that's a good thing. I also don't think that it's nice. I don't like that the humanities are separated from the social scientists and the scientists. Like, I think that one of the unique things about the Oxford experience is that community. On the other side of the coin, things are very antiquated here.
It's a nice way of putting it.
It's probably the nicest way I could put
it. The nicest way you could put it.
I just remember getting my syllabus for my history class, and we had a module on women in which none of the texts were written by women. And there was one Black author in the discipline of history, in all of the discipline of U.S. history, and that was just W.E.B. Du Bois.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And it was just infuriating.
Yeah.
And the people that they had chosen for the syllabus, it's important to understand the discipline. It's important to understand the roots of the discipline. But the fact that we were only really reading people up to about 1940 was a bit odd, especially coming from the States. And so that was very strange to me. And then the other thing that I will say, and I think it's important for people to know, because I think Oxford is such a beautiful, incredible place, and it has this, rosy exterior that people imagine when they think about Oxbridge. But it is also the place where I saw sexism and racism and classism and Islamophobia the most prevalent and without restraint. I had experienced it in terms of, having friends and witnessing it to a degree in terms of microaggressions.
Yes.
In the States.
Yeah.
But here...
Nothing so explicit.
But
Yeah.
But having been in an interaction where somebody told my friend that because she had come from a Middle Eastern country, that she didn't deserve to study here. Yeah. And that she wasn't intelligent. When, by the way, to that jerk that said that, she is the most brilliant person and also has landed not one, but 2 job offers in academia.
There you go.
So there's a complexity to Oxford.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to talk about those complexities.
Absolutely.
And I would say coming in as an international student in particular, it was like really easy to come in and have this really just, glorified image of what it was going to be. And I would say my first term, Michaelmas, was when the rose-colored glasses came off and
you saw it.
And I saw it for what it was, and it was really intense and kind of horrifying. But it was the second term when I realized, like, no, I'm here for my research. I'm here so I can be with my friends, and I'm here so I can, experience this for all that it has to offer.
Yeah.
Then that's when it really turned around for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I think Babel and R.F. Kwong put it perfectly.
Totally agree with that. I think it's so interesting because I'm coming at it as a distance student that comes in every 2-3 months or so and experiences Oxford in that way, and I haven't lived here permanently for a full term or a full year or anything to that extent. But even so, I still feel like, I was chatting to one of the people on my cohort who had some severely racist remarks thrown at them, at a club just the other day while we were here.
Yeah.
And it's quite shocking that is still the mindset of people. But, having said that, as you say, it's still very antiquated in some of the ways that it does that. However, I'm just going to plug for my department real quickly here, because the continuing education department is like a golden nugget in Oxford, because it is such a relatively new department compared to some of the other departments. And it is so committed to having a diverse student body. Yeah. Not just racial or gender or any
background in general,
background, profession, age, anything. It is by far, that is its goal, is to have a diverse student body and to have lifelong learning, no matter what stage you are in life. And I think because of that, my cohort in particular is incredibly diverse. Yeah. And I'm very proud of that personally. But even so, it's still something that I feel like universities need to work hard to address, because as an international student coming in, even, coming just over from Dublin, or coming over from Ireland, I still feel like I end up sitting in a classroom where we talk about English history and Ireland's history is not even included in it. And I always feel like sitting there being like, hello, did we just glance over the fact that Charles I was horrid to Ireland? Can we talk about this for a second? And, it's always acknowledged. It is acknowledged, but it's never really discussed in that sense.
That's a very English thing, though. It's no, we were involved in colonizing the entire planet, but it's just a blip in our history.
It's a blip in our history. It's fine.
It's over now. It's fine. Commonwealth.
The Commonwealth. Fine. But I remember even in our last residency, we were looking at, this is such a specific example, but I think it's so prevalent. We were looking at worldly famines. It's quite a negative subject, but we were looking at worldly famines and pictures of the worldly famine. And so there were pictures from India and from the Middle East and from Africa and all this kind of thing. And there was such a racial sort of lens to that, right?
Yeah, it doesn't happen in our backyard.
No. Well, no pictures of the Irish famine.
Well, exactly.
No pictures of the Irish famine. And
or the fact that, a significant portion of the English population was like dying off.
Correct. Yeah. So why do we not talk about that, So, I mean, anyway, this is a whole nother video. These are the discussions that Kaelyn and I have, like just randomly, like, let's talk about the famine.
But I think that also is in a way representative of what Oxford aims to be.
Yes.
Because as we were walking down the street the other day, and we're just listening to these girls.
Conversation.
Just, just random conversations that people are having. And I can't think of anywhere else in the world, even UCLA or Yale. I can't think of a single place where you just walk down the street and somebody's talking about Marx or Foucault, or they're just having a conversation about the potato famine.
The potato famine. Honestly, did you hear those two girls in Waterstones talking about the potato famine today?
No, I didn't.
It's so funny. This is so prevalent. I can't believe it. But we were in Waterstones earlier on today, and there were these two girls that were talking about the potato famine.
See, I can't think of a single place in the world
where
that's
just standard, right? Where you would go to a cafe and you would hear people talk about the art of translation.
Yeah.
And then in their next conversation, about gossip, which is great. But I think that's something that is actually quite unique to Oxford.
Yeah, I think that that's what Oxford aims to be.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what this environment is meant to introduce.
Yeah. And having said that, Kaelyn came out with me and a couple of the people from my cohort, and we went to the Lamb and Flag. I don't think we had a non-academic-ish kind of discussion.
I mean, we did talk about the lying, dying, cheating husband.
Oh my gosh, okay. I'm going to punt this book. It hasn't come out yet. But one of the people in my cohort told us about this book that's coming out called The Lying, Dying, Cheating Husband.
I just feel like we shouldn't say anything about it.
I'm not going to say anything about it. I'm just going to leave a link in the description below. And maybe it's something we'll discuss in an upcoming video. The Lying, Dying, Cheating Husband. Anyway, I think that's a great place to end.
I think so.
Kaelyn, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
It's been so wonderful, and we'll see you guys all soon. Bye from Oxford.
Bye, friends.